Cool. So YouTube says we are live, and I'm just going to refresh the live stream page, and it looks like chat is working, which is great because it wasn't working last time. Switching to my main camera. Hello, hope you're doing well. It's Q here, back again for another episode, I suppose, of Unsolicited UI Engineering. It is February 24th, Monday, 2020, 12:58 p.m. here in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. It is cold outside, so let's get started, shall we? So for today, we're going to look at this very, very slick animation I found on Dribbble, created by user Dimist. Hopefully that's how you pronounce their name. There are so many things going on here. It's so as someone who's fascinated with UI, user experience, and animation, it's so juicy. It's such a juicy thing to kind of deconstruct and figure out how on earth would I even begin to build this. And whenever you see something like this on Dribbble or Behance or anything else, usually it is made by software or something that isn't code. So in this case, after scrolling through the comments, I believe this was created within an app called Principle. Yeah. So I haven't used Principle personally, but I know folks who have. And Principle, it's sort of like a simplified Adobe After Effects, where that's focused specifically on UI. I believe they have some, so they have like keyframey kind of stuff. It's like a mixture of Sketch and also After Effects with the timeline down there. The other popular one is, I believe, Framer. And there are a couple of services. Anyway, this is really slick because it enables you to basically create something that you can play around and touch with on the phone, and it feels really organic and real. However, it does not provide the code for making this a reality. So for this video, and with the other one I did previously, we are going to figure out how on earth we're going to make this thing. Let me just double check to make sure everything is good. I think live is good. So I'm going to continue. Great. Cool. Oh boy. So first thing I do, I've watched it several times, and you probably watched it while I was taking this video. So I'm going to screen cap a couple things that are going on. Okay. A couple of scenes. Okay. So a couple of key scenes we have. Now I need some of the kind of in-between scenes so I know certain things to kind of focus on. The one I want to capture, that's the one, and I didn't get that one in time. That's okay. So let's see. I have a duplicate. I need to get rid of this one. Okay. I want to get the transition between the movie screen going from this. Whoa, there we go. Cool. There's so many cool things that are happening in this application, but we're gonna plop all of our screenshots into Figma, and I think at the end I'll be able to share this Figma file within the YouTube description, so you'll be able to check it out. Check out all my scribblings. So the first one I believe is this one, and then you get to see this one, and then you get to see this one, and then for the movie selection we have these two. And then for the payment part, which I believe shows Face ID, let me jump back to here. Nope, where is it? There we go. Yeah, so at the end, you see the buy ticket, and then you have, come on, select the rows, great, pay. And then you have the Face ID confirmation, cool. So there's one little shot I need to take, and that is when you interact with the button. Okay, whoa, there was another thing that happened. All right. So I don't know if I can go through every little thing. I'll try. There is so much that's happening in this How many second clip is this? Like 20-second clip. Um, that's all right. I'll focus. I'll try to focus on the most that I can. Well, that's too much zoom in. So the first one is we have a carousel that is slightly kind of I don't know what the right word is. Circular. if that is correct. So there are multiple layers that's happening here in this very first screen. We're going to dissect this very first screen. I'm just going to move these aside. Okay, so we have the main viewport area. I need strokes on these guys. To make it some. What's a good color? Purple? Purple's a fun color. Let's do that. So we have the main viewport, which is a screen. And on top of that, we have, how do I do this in a way that allows for, let me just get rid of the fill. No, that's not how you get rid of fill. There we go. So we have the main screen. However, on top of that, we also have these things that are going on. So I need different colors now. The main screen will be, what's the opposite of purple? Some dark green, some red, something that we can see. Cool. Let me just reduce the opacity for this one. So what I'm drawing right now is you see the background where it says Joker and then Good Boys, the movie poster we have in the background. So essentially you need two screens that are happening in the background that allows you to transition from, so I'm selected here. So let's say I'm on the Joker movie. Kind of wish I can control this video. Wait, I can. Save video as. This is wonderful. Desktop, yes. Great. Now I can control the video. Why didn't I do this to begin with? I should have just done this. All right, cool. So we have the video, and you see how when it transitions from here to here, that means that we have something static, and then we have this swipe kind of effect happening in the background as you're swiping the carousel from left and right. So that, because you can see that they're moving at two different, I don't know what the right word is, but two different layers. That's the only word I can come up with. That indicates that there are two different types of layered animations that are happening. So we have, let's call this one, I need some text, A. I need to make this text giant, 400, yeah. So we have A, which, let's make this a little bit more specific, Joker. So we have Joker as the first one, right? And then we have Good Boys. I don't know any of these movies, by the way. I haven't been to the theater in a long time. So we have the screen, which is the red thing, and then we have the main Joker, original Joker movie poster. As you swipe, the Joker one has to stay on the screen. Then you get this kind of swipe effect happening, right? For Good Boys and Joker, that means you have the two. You have a layer, essentially, that contains both of these posters. I need to get rid of this guy now. So you have a layer that contains both of these movie posters. I'm going to try to draw this. It's so difficult to drag shapes inside of Figma when they don't have fills. Anyway, you have a layer that contains movie posters. It could be Joker, it could be Good Boys, it doesn't matter. It has the current, essentially, and then it has the next, right? And the interesting thing is that oh god, my shapes. Okay, is that the next can appear either from the left or the right, depending on the direction that you drag in. So here you can see, as I'm swiping to the left, the next movie poster thing comes in from the left as well. So the Joker, you can see it's kind of fading into the left there. But the transition isn't necessarily this, right? It's actually more like, how do I even, I know. I need another shape. I need a shape. shape, and then I need that. This is why it's important to label your layers. Mask, which I am not doing a very good job of within this demonstration. So I will get better at this. Use as mask. Use as mask. Did I do this wrong? I'm on it. Oh no. It's because this one needs to be fill opacity 1000, 100, whatever. Okay, cool. Right. So this is what actually needs to happen. Please don't. Yeah. There is a layer above, or that contains the next layer, that does this kind of effect that's happening. There is an overflow hidden of the containing layer, and that containing layer needs to animate from left to right in order to fill the rest of the space. Let me just give this one a background so you can get a better sense of what's happening. Let's make it red with 100% opacity. No, that's awful. Let's make it do that. All right, cool. So we basically have this effect now. You have the current one, you swipe, and then you get something like this. Right? And if you swipe the other direction, then you would have the opposite kind of animation effect where you basically have this happening. Right? So you need something that tracks the current and the next for the background swiping guy. And you need something that has a container with overflow that allows for that kind of wipe animation to happen. So I'm going to write some notes down. So we need some sort of, I don't even know what to call this. Background carousel. I don't know, some sort of background carousel to take care of the layers on the back. And for this one, you need individual items. So you have something that can handle the current and the next. And for the next one, you need some sort of overflow animation. Okay. So if you saw my last little live stream where I kind of did the dissection of this, there are a lot of systems that I talked about last time that is totally applicable to what we have here. So right now, all this stuff is happening on the mobile phone, but you could, if you wanted to be fancy, apply these same designs and interactions for what you can get on the web. Of course, the technologies will be very different. The stuff that you get on mobile is much more sophisticated and much more native and built into the platform compared to what we have on web. Web, we are basically inventing and reinventing a lot of these things just because websites aren't designed to handle animations natively in this manner. They provide you with the raw, bare bones kind of bits, but it's up to you to combine and mash all those bits together to create a lovely animation like what you're seeing inside of this movie right here. So, with that being said, some of the systems that we need to be aware of is we need some sort of animation system. Oh, my text is gone. Whoops. So we need some sort of system. I'll just write that, animation system. We need some sort of gesture-based system for the swipe handling. I'm not going to go too much into that, but these are the two systems that we have. And we also need some sort of routing-based system. Right. So routing, what I mean by that is, let's pretend these are individual pages. We have a Joker page, and we have a Good Boys page, right? There is something usually within at least within mobile, I believe in React Native, it's called a navigation. There's a navigation component of some kind. And for web, you would use a router of some kind. And this is all just front-end JavaScript based stuff. So we'd use that just because you would land on a particular page URL and you would see Joker. But the moment you swipe to the right, you swipe to you swipe to the right, it needs to change the URL to reflect whatever content you have. That way you can copy and paste this URL and now you'll land on Good Boys instead. So there is something. So you have a router-based system, you have an animation, you have a gesture-based system. And every time you change the page that's triggered by your gesture, your swipe or click or whatever it is, it changes the route, and then it would render the new content inside if necessary. So we have that going on. Now, so we have our background carousel, we have our current, and we have our next, and then we have our overflow handling there. Next, we need to have these little guys that you see inside. So I'm just going to take a closer look at this. Okay. So what's interesting is these items, they're kind of on a circular plane. I don't know if that's the right word, but they're not straight. They're not flat. So a good example of something being kind of just regular and flat would be, what is that library? Flickety? By Metaphysi? Is it this one? I need an example of a thing. Yeah. So here, we can see that the items, they're just straight. They're flat. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and so on. They're cut off, similar to what we have here. But the ones here, they're kind of circular. So as the ones come up, the other ones kind of go down in this kind of circular fashion. Flickety is a cool library created by Metaphysi. Metaphysi makes very cool stuff that powers a lot of the things you on the internet, including masonry, which you might be familiar with, which I don't know if they still use. Probably they still do. It was the thing that powered the Pinterest UI and Tumblr as well. Yeah, masonry, very cool library. Metaphysi, very cool studio. And I believe they've also taken control, not taken control, but voluntarily taken ownership and responsibility of improving and maintaining Infinite Scroll, which we all know and love on the web. Anyway, we need to create some sort of carousel system here that leverages our gesture system. So we have the basics of a carousel is you have the container of some kind. Geez, I need strokes and stuff. Stroke. I don't know. Red. Make it 10. Sure. So you have your carousel container, right? Cool. Oh, I know what to do. Multiply. There we go. Now I can like put stuff, and you can see. This is wonderful. I should have done this to begin with. So you have your carousel container guy, which may look like this, right? And then you have your individual cards, which may look like this. So you have your current, you have your previous. Oh, I gotta shrink these guys because now they're getting too big. Okay. And then you have your next, right? So if this one happens to be the first item, right? Then you don't have, what happened? Then you don't have anything here. So the transition that we need to do is something that looks like this. Okay, so that is step 1. Step 2 is the in-between is when you start seeing the shift. Something like that, where they're kind of on the even plane. Somewhere like so. And then this one goes down, and this one goes here. So what you're seeing, these are the keyframes. In animation, these are called keyframes, where these are the most important frames that establish the motion of the animation, how the animation is going to work, how it's gonna work. And then you have to fill in all the things in between. These are the in-between frames, also known as tweening. And from a web context, we would use animation easing to make the computer fill in the rest of the math for us, right? So understanding for when you're doing animation, whether it's web or otherwise, understanding keyframes is very important, because they are the things that dictate all the motions of your animation. So if you only had this and this, if you try to fill this in between, then you kind of, I don't know, like you'll just kind of get that maybe like, it won't be as fluid. You need to establish all the important things that happen from transition A to B. So this is A, and then this is like AB, maybe AB, A.5, and then you have this one. So now that you have this kind of motion happening, there you have to oh wait. Gotta double check something. Can you see the next one after you swipe it? Oh, there's music on this thing. Okay. Ah ha ha. So this is interesting. So on screen in total, you can see 3 things, right? Just because here there are like so. Yeah, so you can see a little bit of the yellow, you can see a little bit of red, right? So that means you'll need to know your current, your previous, and your next, which is common for carousels. As you can see in Flickity, we have several items like this, so 1, 2, 3, and you can also see 4, and so on. When you're doing UI engineering stuff, one thing to be very mindful of is if you have a list of many items. So we don't know how many movies this thing may have. At this point in time, you would most likely ask the designer or the project person or whoever that has an idea of realistically how many posters or how many movie things items that you will load for this particular screen. The reason is if the number is almost always going to be small, something like 5 or 10, right? Then you can afford to perhaps load all of the data for each one of these movies in one shot. If the potential need is to show, say, 20 plus items, it gets very expensive from both a data loading perspective and also a rendering perspective to handle and load 20 plus items within your screen, especially for mobile devices. So what I'm trying to get at is if you have little data, then you can afford to kind of do something like this, where you can load 5 items relatively fine, right? However, if you have many items, then you have to create or leverage some sort of lazy loading mechanism. And if you check out any of these libraries, I believe, is there something for, yeah. So Flickity has a lazy mechanism where they only start loading the image roughly when they're about to come onto the screen. So for example, your application may know, yes, is aware of, has already loaded this. However, this one, it has not loaded yet. It knows roughly, it knows how to load the information by hitting a particular endpoint or API or whatever it is, but it doesn't have the image, it doesn't have the metadata or anything yet. So the moment that this happens, where you transition from that, transition to that, transition to this very specific interaction here, where we know that this one has to be somehow vaguely presented on screen, because you need to kind of have this guy like peeking like that. This is when the data load happens. So the moment that you're in this particular position where this might be needed, you swipe, this one goes, whoops, this one goes like that, this one goes like this, the data has fetched, and then it's like fetching data, and then now it's like, oh yeah, this is the Trolls movie or whatever it is, and now you load, great. And then you have this being positioned like that. And then you just basically repeat this process as you go to next movie. The tricky thing though is if you continue to doing next, swiping through 20 movies or so, Then you have then you basically have a situation where it looks like this. Let's pretend this goes on for 20 more things. This also is very expensive for your app or your carousel to kind of take on, just because there's a lot of things rendered in your browser, images, text, boxes, and so on. And all of these things are kept in memory and is managed by your carousel system for positioning. So usually carousel systems or anything else, if this is the requirement, right, they do a technique that's known as windowing, where they only keep a certain amount of items available at a particular point in time. So here you have something like, I'm going to change this to 10%, right? So let's pretend the carousel, of course, is still aware of these items. However, they've removed the UI from the window. That way, graphically, the browser or your mobile phone or whatever doesn't have to keep these things drawn on screen, which improves the performance and the weight of your carousel significantly. So you need, potentially, depending on your requirements, again, maybe some system that has this kind of stuff going on. The chances, depending on what it is, right? If it's movies, the chances of this happening is probably quite slim, especially if it's only showing the latest movies, right? In this particular case, it's, it seems like it's just showing the movies that's available in the box office and allows you to go buy the tickets and then you go and go watch the movie. However, if you had, say, a e-commerce platform, Nike shoes, Reebok shoes, or whatever it is, and you had many products, right? You had, I don't know how many Nike shoes there are, like 200 shoes. And for some reason, they decided that this particular UI was best to facilitate the browsing of said 200 Nike shoes. Then you would definitely need these mechanisms built in, or else your browser would crash on your mobile phone. So getting that requirement as early as possible is key. And that allows you to make the technical decision of whether or not you need to invest the time in creating these mechanisms for your carousel. So one thing that I've learned through my my years doing UI things, JavaScript things, code things, and so on, is, I'm going to switch my camera just because I'm talking now. This view, yeah. So one important thing that I've learned through my journey in building this stuff is knowing how and when to make the decision to either build a library or to take one on. Far too often, I've seen code bases made unnecessarily difficult when libraries or technologies are adapted just because, well, it solves a problem, sure, but it may be too big, it may be bloated, or it may have too many features or too many some things that is unneeded for this particular use case or any use case that you can think about. Or if you were to build your own library or adapter or whatever it is you need, you may overbuild it. So instead of this project taking like 3 months, it might take a year for reasons, right? So knowing how and when to make those technical decisions, I think, is really important. And the other thing that I'd like to touch upon is I find that even though I've done this many times, it's still tricky. I find that it's slightly trickier within the UI engineering space, just because if you are the person who specializes in this or is responsible for either coming up with the specs or constructing this or designing this or whatever, a lot of the nuances for how these things work typically aren't considered by other people, which is fair. It's not their discipline, it's not their craft, it's not their area of expertise to know about all these various techniques that I just talked about, right? The designer, of course, may have to think about keyframing particular things, how things transition in and out, whether it's easing and so on, but they may not need to think about asynchronous data fetching of things, windowing techniques for certain things, memory management for how items appear in and out, and so on. So it's up to you to, as a UI engineer, to be aware of these techniques so that if you do decide to build your own library or find one externally, like for example, you may want to adopt Flickity for reasons, you know the things to look for in the libraries. You know that you need windowing. How do they handle windowing? How do they do it? Is there gesture? In this case, we do need gesture stuff. Is there gesture support? Does it come out of the box, or do I need to leverage my own gesture system? If I do have my own gesture system right now, is it compatible with the library that I'm going to bring in? All these different decisions are things that you have to make, and the more considerations that you make, I think, the more robust and overall, the only word I can say is better. The better your system, your various UI systems will be, as well as the overall experience of the application, right? Because in the end result, you probably have seen this, where the application or the interaction is fluid, right? It basically works like how the designer has designed it, but there is some jankiness to it, right? When it transitions from A to B or whatever it is, and that usually happens because one of the things I talked about today, all the various considerations you need to make, was something that wasn't considered or overlooked or otherwise. So what may appear to be a tiny thing, like, oh, why does this flash when it transitions from A to B? Or why does it, feel like it's lagging a little bit? Those things aren't necessarily minor fixes. They're usually a symptom of something much deeper. And the much deeper thing are the core principles or the core mechanics of how a carousel system works or so on. Anyway, that was a very deep little dive into how should we think about a carousel. But I just wanted to stress how important those considerations are when you create these things, because the end goal of doing this or anything else, in my opinion, when you're in the UI engineering space, is to create the absolute best user experience that you can. And when you don't, right, your product won't be as good. That's the reality of it, right? Whether when things are missing, things feel broken, things are laggy, the experience isn't as good. And when that happens, right, the overall, I don't know what the right word is, trust or whatever it is, the emotional kind of love that the user has with interacting and using your product suffers a little bit or a lot, depending on how bad it is. And that basically creates a business opportunity for potentially a competitor to focus in on that, so that if the user were to try something else and that experience happens to feel better, then they could churn because, well, this other app works the same but feels better to me and I like it more, therefore I might switch applications. That's a possibility from potentially not paying attention to these things, but it's a ripple effect, right? All these things can impact something much greater, potentially the revenue. Anyway, These are things that we need to consider when building a carousel system. So I'm going to write this down. Background carousel, we have item carousel, or just custom item carousel, which may need to consideration lazy or async loading. We may need to consider windowing. So yeah, windowing is still if you're not familiar with the technique, I think a really good example of windowing being very successful is if you can imagine an Excel spreadsheet, right? That can have tons and tons of cells, 10,000 plus cells. Somehow that thing is able to render on both your desktop and your mobile phone. And that's because I use windowing. Otherwise, your phone would crash. So we have the carousel systems kind of taken care of. Great. I can close this now. I can probably close Flickity. Whoops, I keep bumping into the microphone because it's in my face. I'm going to close Slack. Don't need that anymore. Let's see, what else do we need? Okay, right. So when you tap on a particular item, the scale shrinks. Oh man, there is so much that's happening. There is a ridiculous amount of stuff that's happening. So here's what's happening. The previous and the right items, right, which are loaded as we've established in our carousel system, right here. These little guys, these little nuggets of joy, they need to persist and load as previous and next for an individual item up top, like so. Right, let me just play this in reverse. You'll see they come in. Well, first, they were cards. The card interface disappears. Only the movie poster persists, and they now go up like that as background items, and they animate at different speeds with a spring animation that happens. And you check out the stars. The stars come up at a different rate as well. All right, well, there are a lot of things that's happening. So we definitely need some sort of animation system or animation engine. I have went through this one quite in depth in my previous video. So some popular animation engines that are available today are things like React Spring, Animate.js, GreenSock. Yeah, GreenSock animation. Come on. Yes, this guy. Lots and lots and lots of crazy things that's required to build that. Anyway, so how on earth do we build this thing? Ooh. So now my mind is thinking. We have a carousel system, right? And somehow the carousel system needs to facilitate this kind of transition. Yeah, that's totally possible. Because here's my thinking. Usually with carousel systems, let's say you have something like this. If you were to click on an individual item, right? Sometimes you get like a full view of that picture, which is basically what's happening now. You get a full view of the picture, and then maybe inside the full view picture, let's say that's the full view picture, you have the left and the right items that are kind of there as well. Ah, geez. I'm pressing the wrong key, maybe? Why do I have my hand? No, I don't want a hand. I want this guy. Yeah, great. So, in essence, this guy is becoming this, but it's being rendered and animated in a slightly different way. So, oh boy. So let's map out the keyframes. So we need we need this. Okay. We have many things that are happening. So right now you have the Joker movie poster there. You have these movie posters. We're getting a little bit of detail now. So you have these movie posters for individual items, and then you need to transition from that to this, where the Joker is like tiny. This is the scale animation happening. There is a opacity animation happening here. You can see the opacity changes. And there isn't too much of a size animation happening for the left and right items. I mean, there may be, there might not be. It's difficult to tell. But these ones kind of go invisible, so I'm going to get rid of those. This one partially goes invisible, but I'm going to keep that for now. And these start to come inward. And then we have this keyframe where the card that was originally surrounding the current carousel item expands. You can see that the card expands like so. So we need something that looks like, I'm gonna extend this one a little bit now. You need, whoops. Geez. Please, I just want this guy, yes. Okay, so you need the card to now take up the entire width? Yes, entire width. The entire width, and then you need which was the thumbnail before. Where does it go? It shrinks and then it pops up. Okay, cool. So then you need this guy there, and then 1, 2, 3. Okay. So this guy somehow becomes really big, and it pops up there. And here's the animation sequence. 1, 2, 3. So yeah, they all pop up. They all resize and scale to a particular dimension. They all pop up with the spring animation. And why not let us add our stars? How do I add a shape? Can I add a star in Figma? Yes, I can. Yeah, star. So we have a star that kind of looks like that, right? There is a staggered animation coming in for the star that results in that. Great. So this is the sequence we need for our carousel. And let me see if I can draw this. So I'm gonna write this out. Animation, transition function. Let's see if I can draw this. So how these work, the animation easing is actually using like a spring. So if you can imagine, come on, make this 20. Yeah, the easing kind of looks like this. Can I draw like, yes, great, yeah. Oh no, I need to, is there a delete? Oh, I wish there was an eraser. Oh my goodness, please just select this guy and make it smaller. All right, great. So that looks like that, yeah. So each one of these animations uses a spring that allows it to kind of like bounce, right? Like overextend, pulls back a bit, and kind of goes into place. So each one of these uses a spring animation, which has math and physics and all that kind of stuff kind of built into it. That transitions from one to that. So we need to, so this is basically a carousel UI focusing on an individual item, and the previous and next items which we've created here need to know how to animate into this kind of configuration. So those things need to be built into the carousel. Not only that, but we need to synchronize the carousel transition, right, with the routing system. So if you were to be here, you click on the thing, the route needs to change. Let me see if I can write the route. The route might need to change from slash, let's just say movies, to movies ID, right? Yeah, something like that. So that if you were to hit this particular URL, whether it's in your app or web application, whatever it is, it knows how to load this particular guy. And is there a way to go back? Yeah, there is an X to close. You don't see it in this particular animation, but my guess is that the X basically does a reverse animation here. You start here and then you press X and then it reverses and you get back into here. So the detail that you need to be mindful of, I think, is at any given state, you see these yeses, right? At any given state, I'm going to change my camera back to a little me. At any given state, your carousel, your application, basically must have these 3 items loaded. The previous, if applicable, the current, and the next, if applicable. Just because, depending on where you are within the carousel, you may have a previous, you may have a next. You don't know. So that you can see either this view when you first land here, or this final view, this final single view, when you land here. And the items must be there so that you can reverse, right? So you're starting for an individual item, your movie's ID, and then you click the X and you transition to here, or vice versa. Okay. I can't see with the keyboard with this giant pop filter in my face. All right, so we have those animations there. I've super simplified how this is gonna work, but that's, oh man, there's other guys. This thing staggers up too. So we have basically everything staggers up. The stars do a really, really wicked kind of that kind of thing, and then we have these little guys staggering up like so. These guys do a little pop. The tags, oh man, the title persists. The title transitions to its next spot. So kind of how this happens is, let me draw another guy. So let's pretend this is the card, right? The card needs to go, whoops, geez. The card needs to go somewhere between like this, and I need to draw a background so you can see it. Multiply, yeah. The card needs to somehow go like this to, please, let me click the guy underneath it. All right, there we go. What? Please let me click the guy underneath it. It needs to become something like this. Roughly something like that. Oh yeah, no. Oh my goodness, please. I really dislike it when UI or interactions from applications just gets in the way of me wanting to do a thing. Again, this is why interactions are really important, because you see me trying to do a thing and I can't. And it really throws off my flow. So somehow this needs to become this, right? That means that the differences, why is it selecting? Stop doing things. Okay. The size differences, the width and the height, right, need to be known from point A to point B, so that it knows how to math itself to transition from here to here, right? So let's pretend the width of this guy is, for simplicity's sake, 100. The width of this final one is 300. That means that somehow the difference is 200. Somehow we need to transition from 100 to 200. Sorry, from 100 to 300. And we need to apply the 200 differences somehow. Using your particular transition function of choice. And the position, the X, Y. Every time I do X, Y, I have to draw a graph because I always forget. The top or the Y differences between here and here also you need to math something so that this can transition to this. Cool. So we know how the card transitions. But here's a tricky thing. This title and these tags down here, action, drama, history, they need to transition to their spot there. So while this is happening, let me get rid of these swigglies. Right, the title, I'm just going to use this box for title and so on. The title and the tags also need to transition from here to here at a different time. These things transition at a different time. That means they have their own animation sequences set up. their own triggers or their own delays set up that's independent of the card item here. Right. And I think when you want to plan out your animations, like what you're seeing right here, it's super critical for you to identify the various layers you need to animate when it comes to UI. You need to know what is grouped together so that you can animate them all in one batch or all in one chunk. What layers are different and how to sequence them so that they can all animate together even though they may have different timings. So here we have many layers that are going on. We have 1, 2, right? The previous poster, the previous poster's background, next poster's background, current poster's card. We have the title and the metadata, the stars, and then we have the actor thumbnails coming up. Those all are their own individual chunks, if you can think of them that way. And they all need their own animations. The thing that is binding them together is the mechanism that hits play. So a great way to kind of visualize this is to think about principle. Yeah, is to think about things kind of in this view. If you've ever used iMovie or After Effects or whatever, you have a timeline when things kind of play. You plop out all your various individual layers or chunks or however it is you want to think about them in these various slots. And the moment you hit play, that's when it plays. And your sequence is done when everything is done playing, regardless of when it starts in the timeline. The later it starts, that's an indication that there's a delay there happening, so that maybe, for example, the card transition can happen, can grow before the title guy jumps up and so on. So that's how you plan out your sequences. Oh boy. So now we figured out we need some sort of, so built into all this kind of stuff, usually there is some sort of animation sequencing that is provided by the engine or animation library or so on. So I can give you a good example. If you check out anime.js, this is nuts, by the way. These animations here, or this, or even this, these are nuts. Anyway, documentation, there is staggering. There should be one for keyframes. Yes, I think this is it. I think this is what they use. So keyframes allows you to specify how a thing or a collection of things kind of animate together, like so. So you can then, no, they have timeline. Sorry, timeline is how you specify how a collection of things kind of animate together. So here you have a timeline, and then you add your various timeline items. So here you have a square, you have a circle, you have a triangle, and then you specify how those things get animated. Yeah, so usually animation engines kind of provide you with some sort of mechanism to replicate what you see here. Okay, now we know how to do that, roughly. Oh man, how does this buy button come in? Oh, the buy button just kind of grows alongside with the card. Okay, that is fine. And the buy button kind of stays at the bottom regardless of how you're scrolling. Okay, cool. So this is a detail right here. This pull down to kind of pull down to usually it's pull down to refresh, and the cover of some kind at the top kind of grows to emphasize how much you pulled it down by. You see this a lot for social media kind of applications, so Twitter, potentially the new Facebook. I think I played around with it a little bit and so on, where you have some sort of cover art of some kind at the very top, and once you've hit that top, the more you pull down, the larger the thing grows, right? So I can talk about that little feature right here. Let's pretend we're at a phase where things look like this, right? We have our title, we have our card, And we have our cover, which you see like so, right? And then you have the, are these, yeah, you have something like this. You have all these layers that are going on, okay? But for now, let us, dang it, I want to select the layer underneath. How do I do that? I guess I'm not allowed to, Figma. It's fine. So you have all these layers going on. Let us pretend we're pulling something down. Pull down. Right? You're pulling something down. How does these guys react to your pulling down? Pull down. There is a slight delay before this happens. You can see there is, I don't know how many pixels. Let's pretend that is a drag of 30. So as you're pulling down, after a certain amount, that is when the positional change of the background items and the scale and positional change of the current item happen. That means there is like a buffer period or a threshold or something, right? Where if I pull down, say, 20 pixels or 10 pixels, nothing happens. This guy changes, right? Just because you're scrolling downward, that's fine. However, none of these things trigger. It only triggers after you've hit that threshold. You see this happening a lot for, well, any kind of interaction that looks like this. There is a threshold that happens before your UI understands that, oh, you want me to do something else. A really, really good example of that, and we're going to jump back to Flickity. You see this a lot in carousels. Let me see if I can flick this. Yeah. Right. So you can see that threshold kind of mechanism built into something like here. So hopefully you can see this. Zoom in a bit. Whoa, too much. If I click and I'm dragging, right? If I drag a little bit, nothing happens, just because the library understands that, oh, I didn't intend to swipe next yet. But once you've dragged enough, you don't need to do the rest of it. It understands, oh, I'm going to infer, based on the amount that you've dragged, that you want to see the next item. Sure, I'll take care of that for you, and then they'll animate everything into place, right? So that mechanism, the understanding of threshold, is something that we need to build inside of this little drag cover art looking thing that's happening. Right, so once we've done this, there is a max as well, right? Okay. Oh man, how's the X? The X is then covered by that guy. Okay, cool, that's fine. These ones go down at an angle. Ah, interesting. So, not only do these ones go down, they kind of go down at an angle like so. So, and here is the other important thing that I need to understand when I'm looking at this transition. What is the ratio between my interaction and the motions of the things that I'm dragging? What I mean by that is, if I drag down 1 pixel, do these guys move 1 pixel down and left, or down and right, or down and left, or do they move 1.5 pixels or 2 pixels? So you can, a good illustration of that is what you're seeing here. The scale of which this guy is growing, the cover, seems to be growing at a rate much bigger than the drag that is happening. So the movement of this seems pretty much in line 1-to-1 with how much I'm dragging down the book on the cover on the left and the cover on the right. However, the animation of this particular guy seems to be moving at maybe a 2-to-1 ratio, perhaps. I may be wrong. I'm just doing it based on the downloaded QuickTime movie that I'm playing within QuickTime. So we need to understand how to animate the items in response to our gesture that is dragging down. And the moment that we let go, like that, it needs to understand the original position, which it should have, so that it can snap back to the original guy. And we can see, here's the thing. Here's a very interesting thing. Earlier, we saw that the items, they animate with a spring, right? These little, pay attention to the red and the yellow. They little bob up and down like that. But here, when you let go and the animation plays and it snaps back, there's no spring that happens, right? These guys, it's just like a linear kind of, I'm here, now I get here. There's no spring easing that happens. So that is something that we might want to, you may add in. I don't know. Maybe the designer felt like spring might have been too much. The other thing that we need that usually is built into interactions like this is some sort of max. So that what I mean by that is, whoa. When you drag enough, right? Let's say you've dragged, I don't know, how much is this? Starting from mid-screen all the way there, probably 200 pixels. Let's say you've dragged 200 pixels, pull down is now like around here. The cover image expands to its maximum size at the very top. So if you somehow were able to force drag your phone a little bit more, right? Like or something like that. I just hit the mic. I apologize. If you were able to do that, this thing shouldn't grow to be like that, right? There is a maximum size that your cover must have. So yeah, for this particular animation is understanding the moving pieces and establishing the maximums and establishing the buffers for when animations play, when they kick in, the maximum amount an animation or a UI can transform based on your gesture. And I guess the final one is the ability to snap back into the original position and the animation transitions that are associated with that snapping back mechanism. Or sorry, that snapping back phase. All right, cool. So now we know how to do that. The other interesting detail is the layer of this. The layer of this particular movie cover is so that it's still underneath the card. However, it is on top of the X, and I'm not sure what that is. So there has to be some sort of Z-index something where they are able to layer accordingly so that this, when it's expanded to the maximum, can cover those items. So this is very, very minor, but usually in your code, you have some sort of something, hopefully, that for the context of web, it would be Z-index. It would be something to track the various layer numbers that you have throughout your application so that it's predictable when you want to build various interfaces. You know things won't kind of conflict with one another when you try to do some layering stuff. So, okay, so we have that. And now, when you click the buy button, what happens? Nothing changes up here. The buy transitions. Oh man, there's two layers to this. So yeah, let me just draw the buy button. Geez. Okay, draw this. Stroke 10. Geez, 10 and a multiply of that with a stroke. Is it 10? Yeah, it's 10. Here's the buy button. My goodness. Oh, I just want to add some text, man. Buy. Is that what it says? Buy ticket? Buy ticket, yeah. Okay. So we have some keyframes that are happening. This needs to somehow transition into a circle. How do I draw a circle? My goodness. My goodness. One day I will stop struggling with these applications. I don't think that'll happen anytime soon. For example, I've been using Adobe Illustrator for very, very long. I get very angry at it every single time I use it. Okay, so what happens? So we have a text transition that happens, right? The text fades to nothingness. So I'm just going to do this to kind of illustrate. The other thing that happens is the border radiuses, the border radii, the border radius of this shape goes circular. Oh geez, can I give it a high number? Yeah, so this needs to happen. This needs to fade. And then, whoops. And then when you have a shape like this, a rectangle with border radiuses, if you were to reduce the width of it to something that's of a 1-to-1 ratio, like a 50 by 50 or whatever this button may be, that's how you get a circle. You can get a circle with a square just by using radiuses and width and size and math and stuff. So that transitions to this. And then we are now moving into the movie theater looking UI, which I think is super, super slick. My goodness. There are 2 layers to this button. One is the main black one. The other one is this subtle kind of, oh man, is there a gradient to it? There is a gradient to it. My goodness. So there are 2 buttons. There's 2 layers that's actually there. So you start off with that. And as this grows, so you have the background layer growing as this one is growing, right? So now we have our button that transitions from here to here. This one has a background gradient of something at a 45 degree, I don't know, with a reduced opacity. Okay, and that transitions us to black screen. Black screen is good. So the reason why black screen is good, oh my goodness, I am having a very hard time right now. Okay, so the reason why black screen is good is because you have the ability to no longer have to manage all this stuff that's happening right now. This gives you a clean slate for you to then load your next UI, which happens to be this movie theater view thingy. Right? This goes into black screen. Now you can just forget all, depending on the interaction you have, but hopefully you get to forget all of the carousel and all that kind of stuff's happening just because your button gave you that nice transition. They gave you that blank slate to work off of. So in theory, your movie, your I don't know where it's transitioning to. Probably maybe like by maybe the route. These are the routes. So right now it was movies, right? So it transitioned from the movie to the by, and the by you get to start with a blank black slate to load all the various UI that needs to happen. Okay. Let me just double check something. So there is so usually this is a subtle detail that you can build into your interactions when something is happening. So if you want to avoid if you want to prevent the user from doing anything else when this transition is happening, you can, with code, basically disable interactions somehow for all the things in the background. So for example, what I mean by that is when this circle is expanding, don't allow the user to press X or to drag down or to do anything to interrupt. So there is a very interesting and often overlooked aspect of UI animation is handling interruption. Do you allow for interruption? If so, great. You need to figure out how to handle it. If not, then you need to block interactions somehow. So for web, it's quite simple. All you need to do is you basically have a div that expands the entire screen. It's a transparent div. and you layer it in a way that is on top of everything, but still beneath your circle. So that basically prevents a user from clicking anything because you're basically tapping on a transparent layer. Or like if you can imagine, if you go to a salad bar or something, there's glass that prevents you from like touching anything. That's what this is. It's a glass layer that prevents you from touching the lettuce. That's what you need to build if you want to prevent user interruption for animations. So we have that. We have the circle that's gaining in size, in magnitude, and we now have our black screen. The interesting detail, though, is the X and the circle persist. Okay, it grows. The X and the circle persist. So okay, so what that tells me is this black screen may just be a layer, it probably is, on top of all this other stuff, which means that you still need to, from a memory and application standpoint, maintain all the carousel, all the items potentially, all these little guys and all this stuff while you transition from movies to buy. Maybe. I don't know. The alternative is as this thing transitions, it swaps from the buy to the buy route, and the buy route just happens to have these guys in there. So when the transition happens, it's invisible. You don't see it just because the asset's already there. All right, so now we're in the buy. Now we got to animate all these guys coming in. My goodness, this is fancy stuff, man. Ugh! I'm just seeing how this thing even happened. Okay, so we have two things that are animating in. We have the seats, and we have the film screen. I can't wait to talk about the film screen. I don't know how it's going to happen, but I'm going to figure it out live on air. So we have the seats that animate in. I don't know if there are more seats. For example, if you can like swipe left and right to see more seats in the theater. I'm going to assume there are not. I'm just going to assume this is all you get. Maybe all you can see. This feels like quite a small theater, but that's fine. So we have the seats that animate in, and they're animating in a stagger. What I mean by that is they don't all come in once. They come in rows. So row 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and so on. They come in at different timings. So there's a delay between every single item, and that's how you stagger them in. Before all this, though, there has to be some sort of data fetching that's happening when you're transitioning from movies to buy. And the other benefit of this particular guy right here, when you fade to black, is it allows for you to do data fetching in a pretty seamless way. Like the user doesn't really know that you've hit an API, that things need to load, that there might be a potential wait for data to come in. So this is a very good thing to bring up, because the next time you need to potentially build an animation flow like this, take advantage of blank screens that may appear. Whether it's black or white, it doesn't really matter. When you're transitioning from one route or one state to the other where data fetching may need to happen. Take advantage of that. So here, maybe that's what's happening. It's getting the movie clip, and it's getting and loading the video that needs to play, and it's getting what seats are available and potentially the movie times. So it needs to get that data and needs to populate in. Once it has that, it will then animate all the rows for the seats. As we've established, it's a stagger animation that happens. The movie times, can I move this? Yes, I can. The movie times that appear at the very bottom, they animate in. Great. And the button also pops in from the very bottom. with a, not a spring, just maybe just a regular ease. Okay. So how on earth did they do this part? This is my guess. So I only I'm approaching this from the context of web, just because that's where most of my experience is. How can I? Okay, I need an image of some kind. What's a good movie? Pixar, Brave, Screen Cap. Yes. Okay. Copy image. Oh, that's a huge image. I just need to. Please, just give me a tiny one. Thank you. Copy. Paste. Now it's a tiny image. Okay. Let's pretend this is the video that's being played, right? Is there a way for me to reverse flip this? Oh, yeah. So, for CSS, there is transition, there is a transform, there is transform perspective. So with perspective, you're able to flip things you're seeing forward and backward and that kind of deal. So in this case, as a movie is coming in, like so, there is a scale and a perspective thing that's happening where it's doing this. As it shrinks and as it grows, I wish I can do both at the same time. I can't. But it's doing this kind of thing where you're changing the perspective and you're changing the scale in a linear fashion as it animates in. So we have, I'm just going to draw some keyframes. So we have that. We have potentially this. And then we have the last one that looks like this. Right. So now we have this. And there is a very cool thing that happens here. You see somehow the screen curves, right? Not only that, this may be kind of hard to see on the live stream, but there is a reflection of whatever video is playing down here. Oh, I love this detail so much. Right. So here's what needs to happen. This somehow needs to flip. I can't. Is there a way to like skew this inside of Figma? How do I? Come on, transform. This? Oh. Well, it's not doing what I want it to do, but it's close enough. So somehow you need to skew the perspective to look like this, right? That's how it's transitioning from here to here. How do we... Whoa. Oh, neat. Cool. I'm just going to pretend it's doing that. So, once it gets here, there needs to be this. You need to duplicate the video so that it can play underneath it. And then you need to reduce the opacity maybe to like 10. So now you get that reflection, right? From the big screen to the not big screen. And that's how you get that lovely effect there. But how do we then get the curve? How do you curve this shape? I think the answer is you don't. You apply a shape on top of it to simulate the curve. What I mean by that is you do something that looks like this. All right. And you fill this with, what is the background color of Figma? That, right? So now you have that that's happening. And there's also a tiny curve that happens at the very bottom. Come on. Close enough. All right. So my poorly drawn curves. So what you can do is you can provide an SVG shape or an object or sorry, an asset or something, and it could be a PNG, it doesn't really matter, that fades in, that is applied on top. You can see that it kind of fades in and also does like a left or right kind of thing. You can see at the very top here. That is applied as a layer on top of your video that is playing, which this is my guess as to how this happens, which gives the illusion that the screen is curved. Yes, that's my guess. And there perhaps may be some sort of gradient thing that's happening here that makes the reflection feel a little bit smoother when the footage is being played. But that, I feel like this is how the very lovely, blows my mind kind of film effect thing that they created here, how this is handled. You need to, so step one, transition from movies to buy. Fetch the data, which includes a video asset. Video asset loads. Video asset plays. It transitions both in perspective and also scale into its final size, like so. And then there is a perspective change that happens that skews the image to look like something like that. And then lastly, you have masks or shapes that kind of are overlaid to simulate the illusion of a curved display. Lastly, you have the film duplicated, the video object duplicated and flipped with a reduced opacity at the very bottom to simulate the glow from the screen, from the big screen all the way down to what looks like a glossy floor. And with all that, you get the lovely video animation that you can see. Okay? Great. That is my guess as to how you would accomplish something like that. And now let's look at interactions. He is choosing seats. He or she, my apologies. This person is choosing seats. So they tap on 1, 2. How is it that they chosen 2 seats by ticket? I'm a little confused. Did they tap twice? 1, 2. I'm going to chalk this up to maybe this is just part of the principal prototype where they haven't mocked up how many seats that you can pick. I'm guessing that you tap a seat and you get a seat. And the seat, the animation is quite simple. Oh, it's not actually. This is a very tiny detail you can see here. The seat doesn't change its color from gray to red. There's another thing that happens. The seat is actually 2 layers, one gray, one red. Apply this here. We're going to add strokes. We're going to make them look like this. So here's what happens actually. This is the starting seat. You select it. This starts from nothing, and this grows to, there's a spring effect that happens. I saw it. Just watch very closely. There's a little pop that happens. Pop, pop. Okay. There is a pop that happens, so it overextends, and then it reduces down to its size here. Okay. So a seat has multiple layers. It has, and we don't know, it can only transition from selected to unselected. So we have this. And I'm guessing when you unselect it, it plays in reverse. So a seat has multiple layers, a red layer and a gray layer. And the red layer being selected is animated in with a scale effect with a spring animation. That's how you kind of get this transition in, and the transition out would be the inverse of that. Okay? And I'm guessing they've selected multiple seats. That's why you get the 2. Oh man, here's another detail that happens. This guy. This guy down here, my goodness. And I'm kind of all over the place with this, so my apologies if you do decide to poke through this Figma file at the end. We have the buy button, the pay buttons. My apologies. My apologies. Jeez, I think I need some coffee. We have the pay button down here. The moment a seat is selected, a dollar symbol appears with the appropriate calculated dollar amount. And that dollar amount, because we want to be fancy, doesn't just appear. It does this kind of Rolodex-y kind of number ticker effect that you see like this. You see here. So a good example of that happening is from React Spring. They actually have a demo of this on, I believe, in their examples. Transitions, I believe? Yes, this guy. Right? So in order for you to achieve this effect, you cannot render the individual text as a complete thing. What I mean by that is every single digit needs to be in its own little square. Right? Let's pretend the movie costs $12, like that. Okay? Let us see. Let me just double check. It costs 24 in the end, but then how does it transition? 12 to 24. Okay. Man, so somehow this needs to happen. And it doesn't just, the numbers don't just change from 12 to 24. Like the value doesn't, whoa, I just created a component. I didn't mean to do that. Oh my goodness. Please, I just want to duplicate the item. There we go. The value doesn't just change. It does this fancy little thing that takes care of the in-between. My goodness. The inability to do things within design application drives me nuts. I don't know why. It's like it triggers me so hard. So, my apologies. We need to somehow set up a system that allows for numbers to tick and animate in this fashion. How this happens is we have our original value. We have the next value that we need to transition to, and the system needs to identify how many digits in between the original to the next. For example, if this was 9, then the system needs to fill in the gaps with 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and then transition those and roll those numbers accordingly until you get to your final, right? And I believe all of that animation happens within... I'm just trying to check the speed of this and this, roughly around the same time. So for example, transitioning from 1 to 2 isn't a lot of digits, so that transition may, let's say that the entire transition takes 1 second, right? Transitioning from 1 to 2, that entire thing takes 1 second. Transitioning from 2 to 9 also takes 1 second. So that means the amount of flips you need to do from 2 to 9, the speed of each flip is increased. So instead of taking 1 second from 1 to 2, it'll be like, I can't math, 125 milliseconds for each flip. That gives you the 2 to the 9, so that the first digit and the second digit transitions relatively in the same amount of time. I know it doesn't, because it seems like there is a delay between the first one and the second one, so there is like they complete at different times. But the totality of its animation for its individual digit is, let's say, 1 second for both. It just happens, so there just happens to be a slight delay between both. So now it kind of works like this. Yeah, so you need some, this is where it is very, very recommended that you have some sort of dedicated UI interaction sandbox development environment, because there's so much that goes into just doing the number ticking of this pay button that you need to fiddle around with in order for you to nail the animation, nail the ticking, and nail all that. Trying to do this in the context of the entire application, like let's say you're working on this button and just on that button, it's very costly, I would say, to do it on this entire page, just because there are so many other things that needs to load and render and happen before you can even get to the, let's see what happens when I increment the pay value of my button, right? The movie needs to load, the movie needs to do that little curve effect and all that kind of stuff. So if you're able to work on your button in isolation, that is the ideal scenario you want to get yourself in. There are lots of tools available nowadays to facilitate this in the context of web. There's of course Storybook, or you can create your own little guy or create React app or whatever it is to spin up a dedicated environment for you to work on that thing in isolation. For mobile, I think there is also Storybook. Personally, I haven't played around with that too much. I've used Expo and Create Native app. I believe that's a CLI for it. Haven't worked in Storybook too much myself, unfortunately. However, dedicated UI environment to work on these little details, highly recommended. Anywho, so now we've created essentially our number ticking system that goes into the play button that allows for you to do this, right? We recognize that every single digit needs to live in its own individual shape, rectangle, or whatever it is. There is a stagger between every single digit that appears. So first digit, there is a 0 delay. The second digit, there might be a 250 millisecond delay, right? We understand that the total animation time for each digit may be, say, 1 second, some established value. And this kind of ticker system needs to fill in the gaps between the first value and the second value, right? So it becomes 2 to 9. It needs to fill in 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. The other tricky thing is that it needs to work in reverse. So if a number transitions from, say, 9 to 1, this ticker, instead of flipping upwards, I'm guessing needs to flip downwards. So it needs the direction of the flipping needs to correspond with whether the value increases or decreases. So that is something you need to build into the system as well. Great. We have our play ticking value thing, right? And now once you tap pay, the button shrinks back kinda to a rectangle and then to a disappearing circle, and Face ID verification happens. I'm guessing this may, so to be honest, I don't know what Face ID looks like. I don't know anything with how Face ID works, just because the phone I have is an iPhone 8, which still relies on the handy dandy home button. I don't have Face ID on this thing. So I don't know how Face ID Pay or any of that kind of stuff works. That being said, I don't know if this animation is provided natively by Apple or if it's something that we have to design. And if this is something that we have to design, usually something like this can be accomplished either by animating SVGs, which is quite complicated to be honest, or the cheat method is to have these animations as video assets. So you just play the video, and then depending on whether it resolves, in this case it's a success, or is rejected if the payment fails, then we play either the resolution clip or the rejection clip, either one. That's if you can use video. If you can't, you would animate the SVGs to do whatever it is you want. Okay. And then when the payment happens, everything fades out, but it fades out at different times. For some reason, the available, taken, and select kind of hangs around a little bit. I'm not too sure why, but that's the case. And in recognizing this little detail, that might be something you want to talk to your designer about, just to verify if the timing of this is what they desire. Okay. And I think with that, we have gone over, at least at a high level, we have dissected all the various designs and all the various interactions and UI pieces that's required to. Oh man, and it just cool. And it lastly, hang on, it jumps back to, and then after you buy, the buy is successful. It transitions you back into where you started, the movie index. Great. And because it's a black screen that you can fade, we can fade to black, potentially load the initial view with the carousel and everything in the background. When that is done, then we can remove the pay screen and then reveal the carousel that we have underneath, like so. And that is the entire experience. Great. So with that, we've dissected the various UIs, the various systems, the various considerations that is required to building this multi-carousel, very slick movie selector with a incredible, absolutely incredible buy interaction with this kind of like, I don't know, mini movie theater-esque kind of preview curved screen thing that's going on, and this little tiny, this incrementing ticking pay button with the various numbers. So yeah, I think those are the high level considerations that we need to take care of to building this certain thing. And at this point, after going through all this, it's in this point of a UI engineer's journey, assuming that you work with other people, or maybe you're in a smaller company where you're doing all of this yourself. So assuming you need to coordinate with potentially a JavaScript developer or some sort of developer and also the designer. Clarify certain animation timings, certain interactions with the designer to make sure that you do the design justice when you go to code this stuff. All right, have all the values. Let them know that there may be certain things that are happening that they may not have considered. So for example, the data fetching part that may need to occur at certain parts, either here in the movies to buy or the carousel thing, and ask them to potentially mock up what it. Wow, got some interesting chats. That's weird. So, wonder how that happened. Anyway, so yeah, there are some details like the fetching part. What happens during the fetch? How do we handle load if the load is slower? How do we handle the cases where the fetch may fail? The designer needs to kind of mock that up, just because there may be some very slick way that they want to handle loading, like long loading periods or potential failure periods, that goes beyond just showing like a prompt or some sort of alert saying, whoops, we couldn't do this, right? They may want to transition things in a certain way. So we have to figure that out. And when you communicate with potentially the JavaScript engineer or whoever that you may be working on to building this thing, assuming you're working with someone else and you're not building this on your own, you want to make sure that you have the systems in place. You have the layers, you have the gestures, you have your animation engine, you have routing, you understand how to transition the various carousel systems you have, communicate async loading, communicate windowing, communicate the library considerations you may need to accomplish this thing. And the other thing that is that you may need to work with a back-end person for is to make sure you have the video assets at a particular place. Like, make sure you have all the assets to build the thing you need, because the designer may not have the video clips, right? Like, that has to exist somewhere in your system, in your database, whatever, so that you can load this video clip, so that you can transform it into this curved screen looking thing. So with that, I believe we've done some unsolicited UI engineering for this lovely, absolutely stunning interaction weave that I just found from Dribble by, I apologize, I forget the username. Where did I find this thing? There is a thing. There is. I'll get the clip at the end. No. This is wrong. I have to pull up the. There we go. Dimmest. So, yeah, this was the unsolicited UI engineering for this lovely animation I found on Dribble by Dimmest for their movie 2.0 concept that they originally designed on Principle, I believe, and have showcased on their iPhone something, right? Hopefully you enjoyed this little clip. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I hope you have a fantastic day. Catch you later. Bye. Ending the stream.